Good afternoon, Louisiana, and welcome to Fantasy Roundup for Wednesday, September the 29th. And I'm Zach Ewing alongside Spencer, the Guru Urquhart. And I messed it up again, didn't I? Urquhart.
Hey, you got it. You're good.
All right that time? Okay.
Yes, sir.
We'll eventually get it by the end of the season. We're here to talk some fantasy football. We're going to recap week 3. We're going to look ahead to week 4. If you haven't made waiver claims already, we've got some advice for that. Or even if you have, maybe one of these guys is still floating around out there. And we'll talk some DFS, and we'll answer any questions that we may get, and we'll do a fantasy roundup. How's that sound? So Spencer, let's start with the top scoring quarterbacks from week 3, from the week that was, and finally, my man Josh Allen, who I picked before the season to be the QB1 for the whole season, finally busted out in a big way for the Buffalo Bills, 37 fantasy points. And then from there, as you can see, there's a pretty big gap. Justin Herbert had a big game against the Chiefs. And then the shootout in L.A., Matt Stafford and Tom Brady. And then a surprise name at the bottom of the list from Thursday Night Football, we had Sam Darnold. Spencer, I assume that name at the bottom sticks out to you a little bit. The rest of them we probably expected.
For sure. Yeah, Darnold did pretty well. When Christian McCaffrey went down, he had to step up, and he was up to the challenge. They're 3-0 to showing that Darnold can actually be pretty good when he's not having to deal with incompetency all around him like he did with the Jets. So, yeah, it's good to see him playing well, although it was a soft matchup. So, the Panthers, I think, are going to be a defense, run-the-ball type team. So, I wouldn't expect this moving forward, but he's a good streamer. If you have a good matchup, good streaming option. But, yeah, these top 4 all set it and forget it type quarterbacks. They're all studs. Allen and Herbert got off to kind of slow starts, but I knew that was just a fluke. Those guys are just too good. They're raw talents, elite talents at that. There's going to be a lot more big weeks for them to come moving forward.
And the Bills, listen, Washington's defense hasn't been great so far, but coming into the year, we thought Washington had a good defense. So particularly impressive there from Josh Allen. Moving on to running backs, and the name of the game this week was volume, and Najee Harris got volume. I think now that's 28.2 PPR. If you go down to standard scoring, he's at 14.2 because he had 14 receptions for the Steelers. And kind of a similar story as we go down. Ezekiel Elliott, a lot of volume. Kareem Hunt got volume over Nick Chubb in some ways this week. James Robinson finally was treated like the starter in Jacksonville. And Deandre Swift goes to show you, even on a bad team, James Robinson and Deandre Swift can be fantasy studs.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely true throughout across the board. Just because the team's bad doesn't necessarily mean the fantasy value won't be there, because the garbage time, game script type stuff, a lot of times those guys can do well. Running backs is not always the case, but it was good to see James Robinson that they finally got him involved, because while the offense still wasn't great, they didn't fall completely flat against the Cardinals. They moved the ball somewhat there, so it was good to see J-Rob get a good amount of touches. He should be good to go moving forward. Him and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I know he didn't quite make the top 5, but he had a nice bounce back as well. That was good to see.
Move on to receivers, and I actually received a question about this group too. The number 1 guy was Mike Williams of the Chargers, and this is his second straight really big week. The next 3 names, as you say, Spencer, set it and forget it. You're never going to sit a Devontae Adams, a Cooper Kupp, a Justin Jefferson. Emmanuel Sanders coming into his own, so Sanders maybe belongs in this conversation too. But the question was, I have Calvin Ridley in my lineup, and I have Mike Williams on my bench. My other wide receiver is Chris Godwin, so it's not a guy that you want to bench there. Calvin Ridley off to a very slow start. Beginning of the year, nobody ever would have drafted Mike Williams above Calvin Ridley, but you've got to put Williams in the lineup over Ridley at this point, right?
That's what it's looking like. Yeah, I'll have to agree there. I know I was a Calvin Ridley truther this offseason, but the offense in Atlanta has not panned out well at all. And I thought, even if it didn't, I thought Ridley would still produce. But so far, he's been kind of just really mediocre. Not a total bust, but just kind of just like a WR2 rather than a WR1. Whereas Williams has been a top 5 receiver to start the season. So, I mean, it's no fluke at this point. He's showing that he's got the chemistry with Herbert. He's out to prove it. He's in a contract year. I actually mentioned him in my column yesterday about how he's on a mission. He's a man on a mission, so you got to start him moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you got to find a way to put him in your lineup. And honestly, that's a situation where the question I got didn't say who their flex was. If you've got a flex spot, you probably want to play all three of those guys, unless you've just got somebody else who's a must play. You're loaded at running back or something. But that's probably a situation where Mike Williams becomes your flex or Ridley. Somebody, all three of those guys, there should be room for them in the lineup. Moving on to tight ends, and this is where we're going to get into like a free agent discussion. I mean, because tight end, as we've talked about so many times, is the shallowest position. It's so hard if you don't have a Kelsey, Kittle, Darren Waller, or TJ Hawkinson to find value here. Well, this week we had a bunch of guys. You see Kelsey and Kittle there at the number 4 and 5 spots, and Mike Gesicki probably owned in most leagues as well. But Dalton, Schultz, Tyler Conklin, are you buying these guys, and would you pick them up if you're in a spot where you didn't get one of the top 5 tight ends and you're streaming or you're starting a Jared Cook or a what's a better example than that? A Logan Thomas. Would you pick up a Dalton Schultz or a Tyler Conklin? Are these guys worthy of that roster spot?
Oh, it kind of depends on who you have. I actually feel pretty good about Logan Thomas. I feel like he's pretty consistent. So if you have someone like him, I would probably just hold pat. But with Jared Cook, I don't know about Jared Cook, man. With Williams and Keenan Allen in front of him, he's not getting a whole lot of looks. So I think Conklin's a good ad at this point. I know they got KJ Osborne too. They might kind of go back and forth by Jefferson and Thielen, but it seems like Conklin is taking over as the sole tight end there in Minnesota with Kyle Rudolph gone, Smith injured. So I would say if you're in need of a tight end, Conklin would. I'd rather Conklin over Schultz because I feel like Schultz it was the same thing with him last year. He'd have a big game every now and then, go back to not doing much. So he's gonna have to show me a little more. And they still have Jarwin there too in Dallas. So I'm not quite on board with Schultz yet. But Conklin, I would say, is worth a dart through. Yeah,
Schultz obviously had the big game on Monday night, but as you say, he's a little bit touchdown dependent. He doesn't get that touchdown, and that was a funny game. The Cowboys wide receivers didn't do as much because they didn't have to throw downfield. They had the lead early. They were able to run the ball. Their passing game was more of that short passing game, and so that played into their hands. Maybe a Schultz is a guy you pick up as your tight end too. If you have a Thomas or a Cook, and based on matchups, you kind of toss him in here or there. But that's obviously a risk as well. So as we take one final back look at week 3, Spencer, what stuck out to you from a fantasy football perspective? And then we'll ask your MVP for week 3 as well.
I got you. Yeah, well, week 3 was an interesting week. I had a pretty successful week personally. I won 9 out of 13 of my league, so I was happy about that. The main thing that stood out, though, I was going through the games here, probably just the it's kind of tough to pinpoint one thing. But I will say this: I will shout out Jamar Chase real quick. How consistently good he's been, and what's been a Bengals offense that's done pretty well so far. They haven't been as flashy as people are thinking. Burrow's off to kind of a slow start, but Chase is showing that the transition in the NFL hadn't been too hard for him. I know he had a rough preseason, but he's put that to bed. He's caught 5 touchdowns so far in 3 games. I'm glad I've got a lot of shares of him throughout my league because he's been killing it.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. There were a lot of jokes. He had the drops, and then he had the NFL ball is harder to catch because you don't have the white stripe on it, and so people. Well, what were you practicing with when you left LSU early? How are you not practicing with the NFL? He's right. Just fine. He was always just fine. He was always going to be a star. And so far, so good for Jamar Chase. Spencer, your fantasy MVP for week 3. It wasn't Jamar Chase, but you did go with another wide receiver.
Yes, sir. He had to go with Cooper Kupp. A big shout out to Cooper Kupp. Had a huge week, over 30 points again. He's been the number 1 receiver overall this year. He has just been money in the bank, man, no doubt. He is, another big week, 9 catches, 96 with 2 touchdowns on the season, has already 25 receptions. That's unbelievable. I won't keep this current pace up, but I think he'll still finish. He's going to finish as a top 5 receiver, I feel like, before it's all said and done. And where he was drafted, great value. Mike Williams, we had talked about where he was drafted being a great value, where Cooper Kupp wasn't drafted quite as late, but still, like, he's like a 4th round, sometimes even a 5th round pick, and he's putting up the kind of numbers of a 1st or 2nd rounder.
Yeah, I mean, you look at 367 yards through 3 games, 5 touchdowns. He's on pace for obviously, like you say, he may not keep up that pace, but that's close to 2,000 yards and 17, 18 touchdowns. And well, actually, that over a 17-game season, that's more than 2,000 yards. And so, if he kept that pace up, it'd be historic. But obviously, a terrific start for Cooper Kupp. And you wonder, does he start getting more top wide receiver, top cornerback attention, and then that opens things up for Robert Woods or for a Tyler Higbee or something in that Rams offense as it evolves? Because obviously, defenses are going to have to know this is a guy you've got to give superstar treatment to. Speaking of superstars, my fantasy MVP for week 3, the Buffalo Bills quarterback Josh Allen. Shout out to Fireball, California, my old stomping grounds in the Central Valley. And, here's a guy who has just turned into a bona fide fantasy star and really a real-life star too, Spencer. I mean, 32 of 43, 4 touchdowns, 358 yards. He added a touchdown on the ground, 37 points. And when you talk about MVPs, guys who make differences, it's hard for a quarterback to do that in fantasy because they all score quite a few points. But look at that. He had the best score by a quarterback by 6.3 points, almost 6.4 points this week. That wins you games right there if you had Josh Allen in your lineup.
Most definitely. Yeah, he's a guy that he gets the rushing too. He had that rushing touchdown. It was good to see him. And that was what was costing him the first couple of weeks. He wasn't getting the touchdowns. Or last year, he was a touchdown king, so I figured, that was going to correct itself, and it did so in a big way this week, where he was, like you said, the best quarterback scorer by a big margin. So he'll be great moving forward. Sorry to say the buy low window for him. If you didn't trade for him before this week, you lost your chance because no one's giving up on him now.
I had him in my money league, and I wasn't trading him. I was sticking with Josh Allen. So that was a fool's errand if you were hoping to buy low on him, at least in my league. Waiver wire targets. Now, a lot of leagues already have waiver wires on Tuesdays, and we're going to start trying to do this show earlier in the week so that y'all can get waiver wire information a little bit earlier. But for this week, Spencer, your top waiver wire targets for week 4.
Yeah, I got to go with Chuba Hubbard at the top. He's a guy that people are in leagues with free agent auction bidding, where you have a budget where you can bid on the free agents. He's a guy that you spend your whole budget on, because he's a guy that, I know McCaffrey's not out for the season, but that hamstring could linger. And if he would end up missing a lot of games, and Hubbard is a league winner at that point, because I don't see anybody else in Carolina's backfield that's going to be much of a threat. I mean, Royce Freeman and those guys Hubbard's going to be the main guy, and he catches passes. So for PPR, he's a guy. If he's still floating out there, make sure to go grab him ASAP. He is a stud. And then Hunter Renfrow and Dawson Knox. Renfrow is pretty good. He's just a guy if you need receiver depth, I'd say you could go grab. He's on a Raiders offense that's on the rise, and he seems to be a favorite of Derek Carr. And then Dawson Knox, when we talked about tight ends, he's the guy that on that Buffalo offense, while he's not going to put up the flashy numbers, with Diggs, Beasley, and Sanders, he's a guy that Josh Allen loves to target near the goal line. He gets those quality looks. He's very consistent, and he's somebody that I think in that offense could get double-digit touchdowns. And the way the tight end position is so thin, I think he could parlay that into a top 10 finish.
Good suggestions all. I went in a couple of different directions for my waiver targets for week 4. A couple of these guys really only owned in about 4% of leagues. So we talked about Dalton Schultz and Tyler Conklin, both coming off big weeks. The reason I put them both up there is because, like I say, tight end is such a shallow position that even if you've got a top guy, it can be worth going to get one of these guys just in case you have an injury where George Kittle's out a couple of weeks, TJ Hawkinson misses a couple of weeks, whatever the case might be. You want to have somebody to put in there, because tight end's a spot where if you don't pick right, you could take a 0. I mean, you could get 2 points. A lot of these teams just won't use tight ends, or you'll pick the wrong one. And it's so important to just have a little bit of depth there, just to have something to turn to if you have an injury or a bye week. And so I like both of those guys. And then the other one is, this is a little bit contingent. Josh Jacobs was out last week, and Josh Jacobs has been injury prone so far in his career. Peyton Barber looked really good for the Las Vegas Raiders last week. catching some passes, had some explosive capability. I mean, he's right there in my book with Chuba Hubbard, maybe a couple of spots below him. But if you can't get Chuba, Peyton Barber's a nice look too if Josh Jacobs continues to have injury problems. And he was downgraded last week, kind of like Dalvin Cook was in Minnesota. Alexander Madison probably won a lot of people matchups last week if they had him, because that guy went off. And so sometimes these talented backups can be keys. They're not going to win you seasons unless the starter's out long term, but just here and there they may help you. Well, moving on to DFS for week 4. Let's talk a minute about daily fantasy, where the idea is to find value, right? Now in Super Draft, which is the daily fantasy partner of Caesar Sportsbook, you can use a multiplier value. And so you can have every top guy in the NFL if you want to, but you're not going to get the multiplier. And the idea is still to find those lower guys who you're getting 1.5 the number of points for, 1.7, even 2 times double points for. And that's how you win these things. But just sticking to the DraftKings philosophy, FanDuel philosophy, you're trying to find players who are undervalued so that you can pay up for the stars at certain positions and still get those points from the undervalued guys at lower positions. So, Spencer, who are some of your week 4 values? Not the top guys, but guys that you saw on that DraftKings list that could save you some money.
All righty. Yeah, they had a few good values this week. Starting at the quarterback position. Got to go with Taylor Heinecke there at the Washington football team at 5,900. Good value there. And price, well, I like it there because he's going against the Atlanta Falcons, which is a great matchup for him. I know last week Danny Dimes didn't take advantage of that, but I think Heinecke will. He's a guy that he's got a good rapport going with his receivers. Even hit Antonio Gibson on a touchdown bomb last week. So he's a guy that he's not a flashy name, not a household name, but he's a good value here, and I think he'll be able to get into this plus matchup. At running back, we've got Cordero Patterson. He's continued his strong start to the season as a really nice value here, 4,900. Seems like he's very much involved in the passing game there. A great PPR play. And then RB2, a cheap RB2 for if you want to go grab an elite RB1 like a King Henry, like a Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara. You can do that and afford it if you go with Patterson because he's at a good price there. Shoot, maybe even as a flex play. And then at receiver, we've got Tyler Boyd at 5,200. I just think this is the week, assuming T. Higgins is out, which it's looking like he might be again, going on a short week. He was out last week with a shoulder injury. So it's looking like he'll probably be out again for the Bengals. So I think this is the week Boyd will really showcase himself here on Thursday Night Football in a plus matchup against Jacksonville. I know all the talk's been about Jamar Chase, he is great. I think he'll do well too. But at the 5,200, I think Boyd is probably a slightly better value. And then at tight end, Pat Freiermuth of the Steelers, a rookie. He's passed up Eric Ebron already. It looks like as their starting tight end, and caught his first career touchdown last week. Is really off to a quick start. He's actually in a way off to a better start than Kyle Pitts, the man that everyone was hyping up with Atlanta. He's not. So I think Freiermuth this week at this price. I was scrolling down the tight end list and I was thinking, who's somebody that could be way down, that could be a price really low but could pop, and I think Freiermuth could be that guy.
You were scrolling way down the list and found a gem down there with Pat Freiermuth. I like that pick. Speaking of rookies, my daily fantasy values for this week include a stack, and it includes a rookie in Terrace Marshall out of LSU with the Panthers. And I know we talked about, Spencer, with the Panthers wanting to be a run-first team, but I will also say that without Christian McCaffrey, they're a little bit less likely to do that. And I will also say that given their matchup this week against the Dallas Cowboys, 4.5-point underdogs in Dallas, chances are at some point in the second half, the Panthers are going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have to chase the game. And for a fantasy manager, what that means for you is playing catch-up, garbage time, all of those things. That means points. And if you're looking to save some money, buy up elsewhere, one stack I really like, Sam Darnold and Terrace Marshall. You can spend $10,000 and get your quarterback and a wide receiver out of the deal. And I think both those guys could be bound for some big plays. The Cowboys, if you look at their history this year, they shut down the Eagles pretty well. The Eagles' offense is a bit of a mess when it's not rolling with Jalen Hurts on the ground. But the Cowboys' first 2 games, they gave up big points to Tom Brady, and Antonio Brown, who's their number 2 or maybe even number 3 receiver, if depending on what you think of Chris Godwin. And then their second game against the Chargers, they gave up big points to Justin Herbert and their number 2 receiver, Mike Williams. And so sometimes it's not the DJ Moore or the Robbie Anderson who's going to score points for the Panthers. It might be time for Terrace Marshall to break out. If you're an LSU fan, you've seen what he could do. He could take one to the house from any point on the field. And I like that as a sneaky good stack. My running back, I chose Alex Madison, and this is, again, contingent on the fact that Dalvin Cook misses the game for the Vikings. Again, check Sunday morning. If he misses the game, you don't want to spend $6,600 on Madison. But if he does, Alex Madison was a top, I think he was the number 6 running back in fantasy football last week. He has potential to be that high again for the Vikings, and he's being priced more like the number 15 running back. So there's a lot of value there. But again, Dalvin Cook did practice today, so check, make sure. Now, last week, Dalvin Cook had a setback late in the week. If that were to happen again, I would take Madison. And then a tight end, I took Noah Fant to the Broncos. I just kind of feel like he's due for a breakout week at some point.
Right on. Yeah, I think Fant could do well. Who they get? They get the Ravens this week. Who they did well against the tight end against Hawkinson in week 3, but they struggled against Kelsey and Waller the first 2 weeks. So while Fant isn't quite up there with those guys, he'll definitely get some opportunities. I feel like, especially with Judy and Hamler out for Denver. Yeah,
and Teddy Bridgewater has shown a propensity to go down the field, and Fant is one of those tight ends who's not afraid to go run routes down the field, or maybe I should say is given the opportunity to run routes down the field. As we wrap up week 4, we're going to talk a little bit about some sleepers. And sleepers are guys who probably are already rostered, but you might think about leaving on the bench. But we don't recommend that this week. They might be good DFS values too. Spencer, you went with a confusing backfield situation, but you sense there might be some clarity this week.
Right. Yeah, I went with Trey Sermon there, the 49ers. Yeah, this will kind of depend on Elijah Mitchell's health. He could be back this week, but he's battling a shoulder injury and might be out again. And if so, I feel like it'll be pretty clear. Sermon is the lead dog, and he gets what's even better is a juicy matchup against the Seahawks. The Seahawks have really struggled against the run this season, got absolutely torched by Derrick Henry and then Alexander Madison this past week. So I don't know if Sermon will do quite that well, but he's somebody that I think he's worth a flex play assuming he gets to start, because he's got a chance to really break off some big runs against a leaky front there at the Seahawks. They've just haven't really shown much ability to slow down opposing running backs. And we know the 49ers, when things are going good, they're a run-first team. So I definitely think this could be the week Sermon stakes his claim as the 49ers lead back.
Yeah, he may be the breakout star of the week. And I went with a guy who he's not going to be out there on the waiver wire, but if you have him on your team, you may be thinking about benching him because the Jets' offense is a mess. Corey Davis is still a legitimate talent. He's still getting opportunities. And by the way, he's playing a revenge game this week against the Tennessee Titans, his old team who let him go in the offseason. That's always a factor. And more to the point, the Titans, they've started 2-1. They're fine as far as the NFL standings are concerned. They've been giving up a ton of points to opposing receivers, and specifically top opposing receivers. You look at a Tyler Lockett going off on him for Seattle, and then back in week 1, DeAndre Hopkins went off on him for Arizona. That could be Corey Davis this week, especially if the Jets fall behind like we all think they will, and they're playing that catch-up, that garbage time. Again, Corey Davis has been getting a lot of targets. Zach Wilson is obviously not afraid to sling it. Sometimes he finds the guys in the wrong uniform, but sometimes he's going to find Corey Davis, and I think there's quite an opportunity there. I would not leave him out of your week 4 lineup. Folks, if you have a question for Spencer, you can submit your questions, and that can be a start-sit question, a rankings question, DFS question. He's at Spencer the Guru on Twitter and Instagram. He posts his rankings there every week and answers questions. Spencer, I believe you said you got a trade question this week involving Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Swift. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, the guy he was going to be trading for Jonathan Taylor and Hollywood Brown, going to be buying a little on JT and giving away DeAndre Swift and Chuba Hubbard, which I told him, I was like, yeah, I'd go ahead and do that, assuming you need wide receiver help, because I feel like JT in the long run will actually be an upgrade over Swift, and then Chuba is just a short-term solution. If you can parlay that into a dependable receiver like Hollywood Brown, I would definitely do it.
sounds like an opportunity or a chance, an opportunity of a guy maybe trading to a Christian McCaffrey owner to say, yeah, you can have Chuba Hubbard, but it's going to cost you. And he's buying low on Jonathan Taylor, selling high on DeAndre Swift. It's hard to pull off those deals sometimes because you feel bad giving up a guy who started as hot as DeAndre Swift. But that's exactly what you've got to do. You've got to kind of play the stock market, sell high, buy low, and see if you can't get that value extended throughout the season. So if you've got a question for Spencer, again, you can hit him up on Twitter or Instagram at Spencer the Guru. And in the meantime, you can follow all of our bet.nola.com fantasy coverage on our website, bet.nola.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. You get it in your inbox, your email inbox 6 days a week. That sign up is at nola.com/odds, ODDS, or you can follow our social media channels, BetNola on Twitter or on Facebook. This has been the Fantasy Roundup for Wednesday, September 29th. That's Spencer Urquhart. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next week, everybody.